5 men, 1 jungle, 155 patrols. No backup you can see. No headlines. No medals handed on camera. But here's the thing. They weren't sent to win a war. They were sent to make sure the war didn't swallow a country on the way out. They walked between artillery and ambush. They carried stones in their mouths to stop themselves from drinking. They watched enemies pass within arm's reach and did nothing. They chose silence over fury, and sometimes silence saved hundreds. Stay with me. By the end of this film you'll see the parachute drop into a mountain no one believed you could enter. The ambush that turned a resupply convoy into a smoking grave. And one patrol's impossible choice that decided who lived and who died. This is not the war you think you know. This is the story of New Zealand's quiet tigers. The men who made themselves disappear so others could go home. 26 men fell from the sky into a jungle fortress that had never been breached. They jumped knowing that if the enemy heard them land, they wouldn't survive the night. What they found hidden in those mountains would be called the biggest intelligence coup of the entire Vietnam War. But to get there, they first had to disappear into terrain so hostile that even the Viet Cong feared it. This is the story of how a handful of New Zealand soldiers broke the unbreakable. The Mae Tao Mountains rise 600 meters above the Vietnamese jungle like a clenched fist. 30 square kilometers of vertical hell. Cliffs sharp enough to slice through helicopter rotors. Canopy so thick that sunlight never touches the ground. Vines that catch your skin and don't let go. The soldiers call them wait-a-while vines, because once you're tangled, you're not going anywhere fast. By late 1969, this massif had become something the Australian Task Force Command refused to say out loud: forbidden territory. The maps showed it. The casualty reports proved it. But no one wanted to admit that there was a place in their operational area where the enemy was simply untouchable. Captain Terry Cully knew different. He'd been watching the mountains for months. Cully commanded 4 Troop, the New Zealand Special Air Service contingent attached to the Australian SAS regiment. 26 men. Commonwealth traditions. British training doctrine. But out here, they operated by a different code. See without being seen. His troop had been running reconnaissance patrols since November 1968, learning to read the jungle like other men read newspapers. And the jungle was telling him something disturbing. The trails didn't make sense. Normal Viet Cong trails were opportunistic. They shifted with the seasons, followed dry ground, avoided open spaces. But the paths leading into the Mae Tao were different. They converged, like spokes on a wheel, all pointing toward the center of the massif. Some showed ruts deep enough to suggest heavy cargo. Others had communication wire buried along the edges. Fresh footprints in the mud told stories about load weights and group sizes. The undergrowth had been cleared in ways that suggested permanent occupation rather than temporary transit. Someone was protecting something permanent in those mountains. The briefing came down from 1st Australian Task Force headquarters in early November. The commanding officer didn't dance around it. Intelligence estimates suggested the Viet Cong 5th Division had established a major logistics base somewhere in the Mae Tao, a place where they could rest, rearm, and plan operations without fear of Allied reprisal. The problem was simple. The solution was not. They couldn't just bomb the mountains. The canopy was too thick. They couldn't send helicopters in blind. The landing zones didn't exist, and the altitude played hell with rotor performance. They couldn't walk infantry companies straight up the slopes. The Viet Cong had mined the approaches with repurposed American cluster bombs. What they needed was eyes on the ground. Men who could slip through the outer defenses, map the interior, and identify targets precise enough to justify a full-scale assault. They needed the SAS. Cully understood what was being asked. His NZSAS reconnaissance patrols would insert beyond artillery range, beyond radio relay in many cases, into terrain where rescue would be measured in days rather than hours. If something went wrong, if a patrol stumbled into an enemy base camp or triggered one of those mines, they'd be fighting alone. But there was something else in the briefing that caught his attention. Something in the way the intelligence officer described the trails. The volume of traffic. The types of equipment being carried. It wasn't just ammunition and rice. It was medical supplies. That meant wounded. Lots of them. And wounded men need doctors. Doctors need facilities. Facilities need infrastructure. Somewhere in the Mae Tao was a hospital. And if they could find it, they could break the back of enemy operations in the entire province. December arrived with the heat that makes decisions feel impossible. Cully's men were reaching the end of their tour. 12 months of jungle rotations. 12 months of four-man patrols, sleeping in mud and eating cold rations while watching enemy soldiers walk past close enough to touch. They'd learned which trees the enemy used as trail markers, which streams were safe to drink from, which sounds meant danger and which sounds meant nothing. The replacement troop was arriving. Fresh legs, fresh eyes, but zero jungle sense. The incoming troop commander was Captain Gray Shackey. His reputation preceded him. Hard man, professional to the point of severity. The kind of officer who would later become famous for conducting live-fire hostage rescue demonstrations with the Prime Minister of New Zealand standing in as the hostage. No margin for error. No tolerance for incompetence. But reputation doesn't survive contact with the Maytao. Shackey's men needed to learn the terrain fast, and there was no time for a gradual handover. Someone in the planning cell had a dangerous idea. Most troop rotations in Vietnam happen via transport aircraft landing at established airfields. Safe, predictable, slow. But Operation Marsden was already spinning up. The 6th Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment, reinforced by Victor Company and Whiskey Company, Royal New Zealand Infantry Regiment, were preparing to assault the Maytao. They needed the SAS reconnaissance teams on the ground immediately, saturating the area with patrols to identify gaps in the enemy defenses. The solution was elegant and terrifying. They would parachute Shackey's entire troop directly into the operational area. No one had done an operational combat jump in Vietnam in years. The terrain made it suicidal. The canopy could impale you on landing. The enemy could hear the aircraft. The drop zone would have to be impossibly small, but it would put 26 fresh NZSAS troopers on the ground in hours rather than days. And it would deliver them to places helicopters simply couldn't reach. Cully looked at the mission brief and then at Shackey. The new commander's expression didn't change. He just nodded once. They'd do it. The preparations took 3 days. Shackey's men had all completed airborne training back in New Zealand. But jumping into controlled drop zones with medical teams standing by was nothing like jumping into hostile jungle at night. They rechecked their equipment obsessively. Parachutes were inspected 3 times. Reserve chutes tested. Weapons were cleaned and test-fired. Every piece of gear that could snag or tangle was taped down or secured with dummy cord. The intelligence brief was sobering. The drop zone was a clearing barely large enough for a football field, surrounded by jungle that rose to 40 meters. Wind patterns around the Maytao were unpredictable. The enemy had anti-aircraft positions throughout the region. And if the Viet Cong detected the insertion, the entire operation would be compromised before it began. But there was no alternative. The war didn't wait for perfect conditions. 15 December 1969. Pre-dawn darkness. The cargo bay of the transport aircraft was loud enough to make thinking impossible. 26 men sat in 2 rows, parachutes strapped tight, weapons secured across their chests. Full combat loads, ammunition, radios, rations for a week. Every man carrying at least 80 pounds of gear. Shackey sat near the front, watching his men. Some looked calm, some looked sick. All of them knew the statistics. The Vietnamese jungle had killed paratroopers before, and it would kill them again if they weren't perfect on the landing. The crew chief held up 10 fingers. 10 minutes to the drop zone. Below them, the Maytao Mountains were invisible in the darkness. Just a black mass that swallowed the stars. Somewhere down, there was an enemy who had never been beaten on their home ground. Somewhere down, there were minefields and bunker complexes and soldiers who knew every rock and route. And somewhere down, there was the truth about what the Viet Cong were hiding. The aircraft banked, coming around for the approach run. Shackey felt the familiar pre-jump sensation. Not fear exactly, but a heightened awareness that made every sound louder, every sensation sharper. His hands checked his gear one last time without conscious thought. Weapon secure. Reserve chute handle accessible. Risers clear. 5 minutes. The red light above the door turned on. The men stood, checked each other's gear, hooked their static lines to the cable running the length of the bay. Everything was procedure. Everything was training. But training doesn't prepare you for stepping into darkness over hostile territory. The loadmaster opened the door. The wind roar became deafening. Cold air rushed through the bay, carrying the smell of jungle and aviation fuel. Below, nothing was visible except darkness. They were jumping blind, trusting instruments and coordinates, betting their lives that the clearing would be where the map said it would be. The crew chief pointed at Shaki. 30 seconds. The aircraft leveled off. The wind noise changed as they throttled back to jump speed. Green light. Shaki moved. Didn't think. Didn't hesitate. Just stepped into the roar of the slipstream and let gravity take him. Behind him, his men followed, one after another, trusting the aircraft, trusting the drop zone coordinates, trusting that when their chutes opened, they'd have enough altitude to avoid the rocks. The freefall lasted 3 seconds. Then the static line yanked his chute open and the world changed. The roar of the aircraft faded. The wind became a whisper. And in that moment of relative silence, hanging under the canopy in complete darkness, Shaki understood how exposed they were. The shock of the opening canopy was almost comforting. Then Shaki looked down and saw the problem. The drop zone was smaller than briefed. Much smaller. Trees on 3 sides. Rocks on the 4th. He pulled his risers, steering toward the only clear patch, watching the ground rush up faster than training jumps ever felt. He hit hard. Rolled. Came up weapon ready, scanning for threats. Around him, parachutes blossomed and collapsed as his men landed. Some in the clearing, some in the trees, crashing through branches. One trooper hung, suspended 15 meters up, cutting his way down with a knife. When the last man left the aircraft, the sound didn't fade, it echoed. The canopy trapped it. Every snapped branch felt like a gunshot. Every parachute collapse sounded like movement. If the Viet Cong were awake, the operation was already over. But no shots came. No mortars. Just the jungle settling back into its normal rhythm of insects and distant birds. Within 10 minutes, the troop had assembled, cached their chutes, and melted into the forest. By the time the sun rose, they were invisible. The mission was live. The reconnaissance doctrine was brutal in its simplicity. Move slowly. Observe everything. Report back. Do not engage unless survival demands it. Cully's outgoing patrols had identified the outer ring of trails. Now Shaki's NZSAS teams pushed deeper, looking for the convergence point. They moved in 4-man reconnaissance patrols, spread across different sectors, communicating only when absolutely necessary to avoid radio direction finding by enemy counterintelligence units. Each patrol carried specific objectives. Map the trail networks. Document bunker systems. Identify water sources. Count enemy foot traffic. Photograph anything that looked like permanent infrastructure. The work was slow and dangerous. They moved at night when possible, lying motionless during the day in high positions barely large enough for a man to stretch out. The evidence accumulated like a prosecution case. One patrol found comm wire running alongside a trail, freshly spliced. The wire led deeper into the massif, suggesting a headquarters or command post. Another discovered a water point with bamboo pipes channeling stream water toward the interior. The engineering was sophisticated, multiple diversion points, overflow channels, even filtration systems made from sand and charcoal. A third patrol stumbled onto a bunker system so sophisticated it had drainage ditches and blast walls. The logs used in construction were uniform, suggesting they'd been cut at a sawmill rather than improvised from forest materials. The positions were mutually supporting, with overlapping fields of fire. Someone had spent months building these defenses. This wasn't a temporary camp. This was architecture. The enemy had built something permanent in the Maytao, and they protected it with layers of security that would make a frontal assault catastrophic. The SAS patrols documented everything. Sketched the terrain, measured distances, photographed bunker entrances when they could. Each piece of intelligence was radioed back to headquarters, where analysts assembled the puzzle. But the hospital remained hidden. The patrols pushed deeper. One team discovered a trail junction where 5 paths converged, all showing signs of recent heavy use. Discarded bandage wrappers littered the area. Another team found a refuse pit filled with medical waste, bloody gauze, used syringes, empty pharmaceutical bottles with labels in multiple languages. They were getting close. No infantry unit could have done this work. Moving that slowly would have been detected. Sending helicopters would have exposed the plan. Artillery would have destroyed the evidence. Only long-range reconnaissance patrols, trained to survive without contact, without resupply, without extraction, could map a fortress like this without being seen. The New Zealand SAS didn't fight the fortress. They disarmed it before the first shot was fired. December 8th. D Company, 6th Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment, began the assault. 5 Australian infantry companies pushed into the mountains from different directions, using the gaps in the defenses that the NZSAS reconnaissance patrols had identified. The going was nightmarish. Soldiers hacked through bamboo thickets with machetes, gaining 100 meters a day. Heat exhaustion dropped men faster than enemy fire. But the SAS had been right about the gaps. The minefields were where the patrols said they'd be. The trails went where the maps indicated. The water points were exactly as described. Trust was being built with every meter of ground taken. Then D Company found the first cache, a cave on the southern slope of the massif. Inside were 2,500 anti-personnel grenades, 22 anti-tank mines, and enough explosives to level a village. The munitions were carefully organized, stored in wooden crates with inventory markings. This wasn't a hasty dump. It was a magazine. This was confirmation. They were inside the perimeter. The fortress was real. December 9th. B Company, moving along the northern ridge, found bunkers that didn't make tactical sense. They were too large to be fighting positions, too dispersed to be command posts. Inside were beds. Not sleeping mats, beds. Bamboo frames with mosquito netting. Next to them were medical waste pits filled with bloody bandages and empty medicine bottles. They'd found the edges of the hospital. 2 days later, Victor 4 Company, Royal New Zealand Infantry Regiment, located a complex in the southeast sector. 17 bunkers, each large enough to hold multiple patients. Estimated capacity of 100 casualties. The structures had been constructed with engineering precision. Overhead cover thick enough to survive artillery. Ventilation systems that prevented smoke buildup. Drainage channels that kept the floors dry during monsoon season. The Viet Cong hadn't just built a field hospital. They'd built a fortress hospital, but the main complex remained undiscovered. The intelligence analysis suggested a central facility that could handle the serious cases. Operating theaters, pharmacy, dental, something with the capacity to treat not just dozens, but hundreds of wounded soldiers. Victor 3 Company drew the assignment. The New Zealand infantry pushed into the central sanctuary of the massif, following a trail that the NZSAS reconnaissance teams had marked as heavily trafficked. The jungle was thicker here, darker, the kind of terrain where you could walk within 3 meters of a bunker and never see it. The company moved in single file, each man watching the soldier in front, trusting the point man to navigate the trail. The heat was suffocating. Sweat soaked through uniforms within minutes. Every step required conscious effort as boots sank into mud and roots grabbed at ankles. Then they found the stream. Not a seasonal drainage, but a permanent water source, flowing clear and cold from somewhere higher in the massif. And beside it, half hidden under camouflage and vegetation, was the entrance to the K-76A hospital. The New Zealand infantrymen moved carefully. Clearing bunkers is surgical work. Every entrance could be booby-trapped. Every corner could hide a defender willing to die to protect the facility. They moved room by room, bunker by bunker, weapons ready for contact that never came. But when they breached the main complex, something was wrong. There was no resistance, no gunfire, no grenades, just silence, and the smell of antiseptic and sickness. Inside the bunkers, they found the patients. 14 of them, bedridden, convalescing, too wounded to run, too sick to fight. Some were barely conscious, burning with fever. Others were alert, but immobilized by bandages and splints. The Viet Cong security element had evacuated when they heard the New Zealanders coming, leaving their own wounded behind. The looks on those patients' faces told the story. They hadn't expected anyone to find them. The Maytao was supposed to be untouchable. The NZSAS had not assaulted the hospital. They had made the assault possible. This was the intelligence coup. Not the facility itself, though that was significant. Not the supplies, though those were massive. It was the people. The patients who could answer questions about unit designations, command structures, recent operations. The medical staff who'd been captured trying to hide in the jungle. Each one of them represented a thread that intelligence officers could pull to unravel the entire enemy logistics network in the province. The scale of the discovery became clear over the following days as more of the hospital complex was secured and cataloged. The K-76A wasn't just a hospital. It was the hospital, the primary medical provider for the Viet Cong 5th Division and every guerrilla unit operating in the region. Capacity, 250 patients. Staff, 150 doctors, nurses, and medics. Facilities included underground operating theaters, literal pits dug into the earth where surgeons worked by lantern light. The walls were reinforced with timber and sandbags. The floors were lined with bamboo matting to keep them dry. Surgical instruments were stored in sterilized containers. Recovery wards held rows of beds, each with a patient card noting their name, unit, and injuries. There was a pharmacy storage bunker the size of a small warehouse. Dental posts for treating the chronic tooth infections that plagued soldiers eating wartime diets. Living quarters for long-term patients who needed months of recovery. Bomb shelters for when American aircraft came too close. Even a rudimentary laboratory where blood typing could be performed. And the supplies. The pharmaceutical cache was staggering. 1.5 tons of medical equipment and drugs. The largest single medical capture of the entire war. The inventory told a story about the global nature of the conflict. Anti-malarial drugs from the United States, likely stolen from South Vietnamese stocks or purchased on Saigon's black market. Antibiotics from American pharmaceutical companies, their labels still pristine. Surgical fluids from West Germany in sterile glass bottles. Anesthetics from France. Intravenous equipment from China. Bandages from East Germany. Surgical sutures from the Soviet Union. The Viet Cong had assembled a world-class medical capability in the middle of hostile territory, under constant threat of discovery, and they'd kept it operational for years. The logistical achievement was remarkable even as it was being dismantled. But the strategic impact went beyond the physical loss. In the tropical environment of Vietnam, medicine was the difference between a recoverable wound and a death sentence. Minor cuts became infected within hours. Malaria burned through units like wildfire. Dysentery turned soldiers into casualties without a shot being fired. Heat exhaustion killed as efficiently as bullets. By stripping the enemy of 1.5 tons of medical supplies, Operation Marsden had effectively neutralized the combat power of units that hadn't even been engaged yet. The Viet Cong 5th Division would spend the next 6 months trying to replace the stockpile, smuggling drugs down the Ho Chi Minh Trail one backpack at a time they couldn't spend planning offensives. The mountain fortress had fallen, and with it, the myth of enemy invincibility in Phuoc Thi Province. The casualty figures for Operation Marsden told their own story. 4 Australian soldiers killed in action, 9 wounded. The New Zealand infantry companies took mine casualties during the approach phase, but suffered no fatalities during the hospital seizure itself. The NZSAS came through the operation without losing a man. The parachute insertion had worked. The reconnaissance patrols had done their job without being compromised. The intelligence product had saved lives by allowing the infantry to bypass the heaviest defenses. But the Maytao wasn't finished with the SAS. Sergeant G.J. Campbell. 14 January 1970. Follow-up patrol in the approach sector. The area was supposed to be clear. It wasn't. Campbell had survived the jump. He had survived the reconnaissance. He was killed after the fortress fell, when the danger was supposed to be over. He became the first NZSAS fatality of the Vietnam War. His death underscored the persistent danger of the mountains. Even after the main complex was destroyed, even after the enemy had been driven out, the terrain itself remained hostile. Booby traps hidden under leaves. Stay-behind snipers in trees. Minefields that shifted with the monsoon rains, exposing previously buried ordnance. The fortress could be conquered but never truly tamed. For the Viet Cong, the losses were catastrophic. 22 confirmed killed, 5 wounded and captured, and 21 prisoners of war. A number almost unheard of in a conflict where the enemy typically fought to the death or successfully evacuated before being cornered. 14 of those prisoners were patients of the K-76A hospital. Bedridden, unable to flee, captured because the assault had achieved total tactical surprise. That surprise was the direct result of the intelligence work done by the NZSAS reconnaissance patrols. By mapping the defenses and identifying the gaps, they'd allowed the infantry companies to penetrate the inner sanctum before the alarm could be raised. The patients couldn't run, and by the time they realized the New Zealanders were inside the perimeter, it was too late. General Creighton Abrams commanded all U.S. military forces in Vietnam. 4 stars. West Point. Armor commander in World War II. Not a man given to exaggeration or dramatic pronouncements. When he reviewed the intelligence haul from Operation Marsden, he called it the biggest intelligence coup of the war. It wasn't hyperbole. The capture of the K-76A hospital complex yielded more than supplies and prisoners. It delivered the kind of actionable intelligence that intelligence officers dream about and almost never obtain. The medical records alone were gold. Every patient treated at the hospital generated paperwork, unit designations, home villages, dates of wounding, types of injuries, treatment protocols, doctor's notes. From this data, analysts could reconstruct the enemy order of battle with unprecedented accuracy. They could identify which units had been in which fights. They could track casualty rates and draw conclusions about morale and combat effectiveness. The captured medical staff provided human intelligence that filled gaps the documents couldn't cover. They knew the supply routes, which trails were used, which river crossings were safest, which villages provided support. They knew the schedules, when supplies arrived, when wounded were evacuated, when headquarters elements rotated through. They knew the names of commanders and the locations of other facilities scattered throughout the region. Under interrogation, not torture, but professional questioning, they described a logistics network that spanned the entire region. The intelligence painted a picture of an enemy organization far more sophisticated than previously believed. Administrative records found in the pharmacy and headquarters bunkers detailed requisitions, delivery schedules, and correspondence with higher command. The paper trail led all the way to Cambodia and the port of Sihanoukville, where Chinese and Soviet supplies were being smuggled into the country. It revealed the financial mechanisms, the corruption networks, the intermediaries who made the supply chain function. For the first time, the Allied forces had a complete picture of how the enemy sustained their war effort in Phuoc Thi province. And with that picture came the ability to target the nodes that mattered. The greatest damage wasn't physical. It was belief. The Viet Cong 5th Division had trusted the Mae Tao to protect them. Operation Marsden proved that knowledge, not terrain, decides who survives a war. Once that belief was broken, the fortress never mattered again. For the New Zealand Special Air Service, Operation Marsden became a defining moment in their operational history. It validated every aspect of their doctrine. The parachute insertion had worked. The long-range reconnaissance patrols had provided actionable intelligence. The integration with Australian forces had been seamless. The mission had been executed without friendly casualties during the critical phase. Captain Gray Shackey's troop continued operations throughout their tour, running patrols that built on the intelligence foundation established during Marsden. When they rotated home, they carried with them lessons that would shape NZSAS doctrine for decades. The emphasis on precise intelligence over kinetic engagement, the value of patience and observation, the importance of being able to insert via any means necessary, air, land, or sea. The understanding that small teams of highly trained operators could achieve strategic effects that entire battalions could not. These principles would echo through later deployments to Afghanistan and counterterrorism operations around the world. But the legacy extended beyond tactics and doctrine. It was about proving that a small nation could contribute capabilities that were disproportionate to its size. 26 New Zealanders, operating as part of a larger Allied task force, had provided the intelligence that unlocked a decisive victory. They demonstrated that elite forces, properly trained and employed, act as strategic force multipliers. For the Viet Cong, the aftermath of Operation Marsden was a slow-motion catastrophe. The loss of the K-76A hospital forced them to disperse their medical capabilities into smaller, less efficient facilities scattered across the countryside. This degradation of medical support increased the mortality rate of wounded soldiers and contributed directly to the decline of main force activity in Phuoc Thi province throughout 1970 and 71. Units that had previously operated with the confidence that serious casualties could be treated now faced the prospect of death from survivable wounds. Morale suffered. Recruitment became more difficult. The calculus of engaging Allied forces shifted when survival meant weeks of painful travel to distant hospitals rather than hours to the Mae Tao. By destroying the fortress hospital, Operation Marsden didn't just remove a logistics node. It removed hope. Today, the Mae Tao Mountains are quiet. The bunkers are collapsed. The trails are overgrown. The operating theaters are filled with dirt and leaves. Time and weather have reclaimed what war once made significant. But the story endures in the regimental histories and the memories of the men who were there. Veterans who jumped from aircraft into darkness. Soldiers who crawled through jungles so thick they measured progress in meters per hour. The New Zealanders who walked into a mountain fortress that had never been breached and came out with the intelligence coup of the war. Operation Marsden proved something that military planners had suspected but never quite believed. That with precise intelligence, careful planning, and the courage to execute high-risk operations, there were no untouchable sanctuaries. That terrain could be an ally or an enemy, depending on who controlled the information about it. The Viet Cong had built their fortress in the Mae Tao because they believed the mountains would protect them. They were wrong. The mountains were neutral. They protected whoever knew them better. And in December 1969, that was the New Zealand Special Air Service. The fortress fell not because of overwhelming firepower or numerical superiority. It fell because a handful of soldiers learned to see in the dark, move without sound, and map an enemy sanctuary with such precision that when the assault came, it was already over before it began. That's the true lesson of Operation Marsden. Wars aren't won by the side with the most soldiers or the biggest guns. They're won by the side that knows what the enemy doesn't want them to know. 26 men fell from the sky into a mountain that was supposed to be untouchable. They didn't conquer it with firepower. They conquered it by knowing it better than the enemy ever did. The mountain fortress was unbreakable, until it wasn't. Every step could detonate an M16 mine. The device would leap waist-high before shredding you with 700 steel balls. You'd hear the click, then the jump, then nothing but your own screaming. 26 New Zealand soldiers. 155 patrols into enemy territory. Fighting a war everyone already knew was lost. In 1970, as Western forces withdrew from Vietnam, 26 New Zealand soldiers conducted the most dangerous reconnaissance missions of the war, becoming so effective that the enemy named them the Quiet Tigers. The helicopter descends through monsoon rain toward the landing zone. Inside, 12 men from the New Zealand Special Air Service sit in silence. Their weapons are modified beyond recognition. The door gunner scans the tree line through sheets of water. 6 of them aren't supposed to be here. August 1970. Vietnam is ending. President Nixon has declared Vietnamization, the systematic withdrawal of Western forces. The Australian task force at Nui that is packing to leave. American units are streaming toward the coast. But you can't just walk away from a war. The Viet Cong's D445 battalion knows the Australians and New Zealanders are preparing to abandon Phuoc Thi province. They've been tracking the withdrawal for months, counting helicopters, noting which units rotate out but don't return. They're preparing to reclaim every village the moment the last Western boot leaves. The solution is Operation Cong Chong, Vietnamese for togetherness. The reality is surgical violence designed to cripple enemy infrastructure so completely they can't exploit the withdrawal. Roads must be secured, supply lines severed, rice caches destroyed, and someone has to go deep into the jungle sanctuaries to find where the enemy sleeps, where they cache supplies, where they plan their attacks. That's where 4 Troop comes in. 26 men selected from New Zealand's 1st Ranger Squadron. They fight with a doctrine honed in Malaya and Borneo. Extreme patience, superior tracking, capturing prisoners for intelligence rather than stacking bodies for statistics. The Viet Cong have a name for them, the Quiet Tigers. They move through jungle in total silence. No smoking, no scented soap, fatigues washed in unscented detergent. They communicate by hand signals and radio clicks. A patrol can pass within 10 meters of an enemy position without being detected. But by 1970, the enemy has evolved. They've learned to recognize the distinctive sound of insertion helicopters. They've placed observation posts near every likely landing zone. They monitor radio frequencies using captured American equipment. The jungle isn't just hostile anymore. It's intelligent. The new tactic is elegant and brutal. Let the SAS land, track them for hours until they set up for the night, then hit them in darkness when they can't call for extraction. Finish it before dawn. Leave no survivors to report your technique. And if tracking doesn't work, there are the mines. M16 jumping jack mines. Anti-tank mines converted for anti-personnel use. Improvised devices built from unexploded 500-pound bombs. They seed every trail, every clearing, every obvious patrol route. But more dangerously, they've started mining the detour routes too. They know the SAS will avoid obvious trails, so they mine the thick bush beside the trails where cautious men would walk. Lieutenant James Williams understands the mathematics. 24 years old. Third tour. He's seen 7 men from his original selection course killed or maimed. The SAS has survived on stealth, but stealth is a depreciating asset. Every patrol reveals a pattern. Every insertion teaches the enemy something new. The question isn't if they'll be compromised. It's when. The helicopter flares above the landing zone. The door gunner scans the tree line. No visible enemy. No muzzle flashes. That means nothing. 12 men exit fast. They sprint for the jungle edge and disappear into green darkness. This is the cowboy insertion. Nothing about it is what it seems. The patrol moves in tactical file through primary jungle. Visibility, 15 meters. The canopy is so dense that noon feels like dusk. Rain hammers through gaps. The temperature is 35 degrees, but feels like 40 with humidity. 100 meters into cover, they stop. Williams raises his hand. The patrol freezes. He signals with finger movements. 6 men detach from the main element. They turn around and begin running back toward the landing zone. This is the deception. 6 men are the cowboys. Their job is to make noise, to be seen, to board the helicopter that circled back. They crash through vegetation deliberately. They want to be heard. A Viet Cong observer sees troops land, sees troops leave. The insertion looks aborted. The helicopter departs. The observer radios. False alarm. 6 men remain in the jungle. Williams' actual reconnaissance patrol. They lie motionless 50 meters from the landing zone. Weapons pointed outward in a defensive star. They don't move for 3 hours. Barely breathe. Listening for footsteps, for vegetation rustling, for any indication they've been spotted. A mosquito lands on Williams' neck. Feeds. He doesn't move to kill it. Corporal David Chun lies beside him. His eyes are closed, but he's not sleeping. He's listening to the jungle. The bird calls. The insect sounds. Filtering through layers of noise for the one sound that doesn't belong. After 3 hours, Williams signals. The patrol rises slowly. They begin moving deeper into the operational area. Their mission: locate and map the supply trails connecting the Nui Mai Tao Mountains to villages along Route 2. They weren't sent here to win. They were sent to delay, to deny, to make every enemy decision cost blood and time. Chen walks point. His family immigrated from Hong Kong when he was 7. The military didn't know what to do with him during selection until someone realized his outsider perspective made him see details others missed. The bent grass blade that's been stepped on versus bent by wind. The scuff mark on a root. The single boot print in mud that's 2 days old but tells you the trail is active. The patrol moves at 50 meters per hour. Every step calculated. Every footfall tested before committing weight. They're not just watching for the enemy. They're reading the jungle for signs of human presence that could be hours or days old. By day 3, Williams has stopped counting hours. He counts footsteps now. Chun raises his fist. The patrol freezes mid-step. He kneels and examines the ground. Traces something with his finger. Looks back at Williams. Draws his finger across his throat. Mines. There's a tripwire. Monofilament fishing line stretched between 2 trees at ankle height. Nearly invisible even when you're looking for it. Chun traces it to the device. An M16 mine mounted in a tree fork at waist height. Break that wire and the mine leaps out before detonating. 700 steel balls. Kill radius, 10 meters. In this dense vegetation, there's nowhere to run. Chun doesn't disarm it. He marks the location with barely visible engineer tape, then leads the patrol around through the thickest undergrowth. 40 minutes to move 30 meters. This is the ground truth of Vietnam in 1970. You're not fighting the enemy. You're fighting the environment the enemy has weaponized. Every trail is a trap. Every clearing is a kill zone. The patrol continues for 6 days. They move mostly at dawn and dusk. During midday, they harbor in thick cover, rotating security shifts. 2 hours on watch, 4 hours rest. Except no one really rests. You lie in the mud wondering if that sound is an enemy patrol moving toward your position. On day 4, Chun spots what they're looking for. The supply trail runs north-south through a saddle in the foothills. Multiple boot prints overlapping. Not sandals, boots. North Vietnamese Army regulars. The prints are fresh. less than 12 hours old. Deep impressions indicating heavy loads. The patrol moves parallel to the trail, staying 50 meters off in thick cover. After 2 kilometers, they smell it. Wood smoke. Someone is cooking. Williams signals a halt. They go to ground. 20 minutes, listening. Confirming the smoke is from a static position. A camp. Now comes the most dangerous part. Close target reconnaissance. Crawl to within visual range and count personnel, identify weapons, note defensive positions. Williams takes 2 men forward. Chun and 1 other. They crawl, full prone through mud and rotting vegetation. 30 minutes to cover 80 meters. They reach a position with line of sight. 6 men. Porters, not combat troops. Exhausted, slumped, resting beside rice bags stacked under a tarpaulin. 1 AK-47 leaning against a tree. The security is lazy. These men think they're safe. They're wrong. Williams makes notes on waterproof paper with a grease pencil. He sketches the layout. Notes grid coordinates with precision. Uses a cloth-wrapped camera to take 3 black and white photographs. Then he crawls back. The patrol withdraws 500 meters. Williams gets on the radio. The PRC-77 with the whisper microphone pressed against his throat. His voice is barely audible even 1 meter away. Just vibrations transmitted through bone. He transmits coordinates, target description, recommends fire mission. The reply comes back in code. Mission approved. Fire in 20 minutes. 6 rounds. High explosive. They move further back. 600 meters from the target when the shells arrive. The 107 field battery will fire from 12 kilometers away. The shells will arc high over the canopy and come straight down. The patrol waits. Williams checks his chronograph. 19 minutes. Exactly 20 minutes later, they hear the incoming rounds. The distinctive whistle that starts high and drops lower. 6 crashes in rapid succession. The jungle erupts with splintering trees and high explosive detonating against wet earth. The sound rolls through valleys like thunder. Birds explode from the canopy. The percussion wave hits even at 600 meters, a pressure change you feel in your chest. Then silence returns. The birds settle. The insects resume. The rain continues. The patrol doesn't go back to confirm. That would risk walking into survivors or reinforcements. They've done their job. The coordinates are confirmed. The rice cache is destroyed. The supply line is severed. This is denial warfare. You don't hold territory. You don't raise flags. You make territory unusable. You disrupt logistics. You force the enemy to spend resources on security instead of operations. Williams' patrol moves to an extraction point 3 kilometers away. 10 minutes later, they're back at Nui Dat. They'll spend 2 days debriefing. Every detail recorded. Every observation analyzed. Every mine location marked for artillery targeting. They'll clean corroded weapons. Treat their feet for immersion rot. Sleep in actual beds. Eat hot food. Shower. For 48 hours, they'll pretend they're human beings instead of predators. Then they'll go back into the jungle. 149 more patrols to go. The tactic they just used worked perfectly. The enemy never saw them. It won't work again. The enemy is learning. September 21st, 1970. Operation Kung Chung 3 begins. The mission shifts to harvest interdiction. Every ton of rice denied is a squad that goes hungry. Every cache destroyed forces them to forage instead of fight. Intelligence reports indicate the enemy is using ant lines, long chains of porters carrying rice in burlap sacks from villages to deep jungle caches. Sometimes 30 or 40 porters moving in single file, each carrying 20 kilograms. Williams' patrol is inserted into the eastern approaches of the Nui Mai Tao Mountains. Known bad territory, red zone, free fire area. The mountain complex serves as the primary sanctuary for communist forces. Hospitals, training camps, command bunkers, all hidden under triple canopy jungle on terrain so steep that conventional infantry can't operate. The SAS can, because they're not infantry. They don't need trails. They don't need support. They're ghosts. The patrol moves for 3 days without contact. They find porter tracks, rest areas where porters stop to eat. Bunker complexes recently occupied but now empty. Cooking fires still warm. The enemy is moving ahead of them. Someone always seems just beyond visual range. Like they're being herded. On day 4, the trap closes. Shen walks point through secondary jungle where visibility is slightly better. maybe 30 meters instead of 15. His modified L101 rifle, the bitch, held at low ready. Shortened barrel. Full automatic capability. 30-round magazine. Designed for one purpose. Overwhelming firepower to suppress and escape. Chen takes 3 more steps. Tests the ground. Commits his weight. Freezes. There's a man standing 40 meters ahead. Partially concealed behind a tree. Pith helmet. Chest webbing. AK-47 held at waist level. He's looking directly at Chen. Not searching. Looking at him specifically. For one eternal second, neither moves. 2 professionals. 2 predators. Both realizing the hunt has ended and the killing is about to begin. Chen doesn't hesitate. Training overrides thought. He brings the bitch up and fires 6 rounds. The sound is apocalyptic. The muzzle blast is a physical force. The man drops. But he wasn't alone. The jungle explodes with return fire. AK rounds crack overhead with that supersonic snap. Chen hits the ground and rolls left. The patrol is already reacting. Contact front, immediate action drill rehearsed 1,000 times. They form a hasty firing line and pour suppressive fire forward. The enemy is dug in. This isn't a chance encounter. This is a prepared position. An L-shaped ambush with interlocking fields of fire. They've been tracking the patrol. They knew where Williams would go. They let the patrol walk into the kill zone and waited. The SAS has walked into a trap. Williams makes the only decision possible. Fight through the ambush. You can't retreat backward. That's where the heaviest fire concentrates. You can't stay static. That's suicide. You have to break the enemy line and escape perpendicular to the kill zone. He signals the maneuver. The patrol splits into 2 elements without verbal communication. 3 men keep firing forward. 3 men bound left 20 meters through thick vegetation. Then they fire while the first element bounds past them. Leapfrogging. It only works if everyone executes perfectly under fire. If anyone hesitates, the entire patrol dies. They execute perfectly. Private Michael Foster takes a round through the calf during the second bound. Goes down screaming. Lance Corporal Davies grabs Foster's webbing harness and drags him bodily during the next bound. Foster is still screaming. Still firing his weapon one-handed while being dragged. Chen is firing the bitch in controlled bursts. He's burning through his magazine, but the volume of fire keeps enemy heads down. Williams gets through to the task force on the radio. He transmits the brevity code for troops in contact. Grid coordinates. Requests immediate helicopter extraction and close air support. Gunships. Fast movers. Anything. The response is devastating. Negative on all requests. Weather has closed in. The monsoon has arrived in full force. Cloud ceiling too low for helicopters. Too low for fixed wing. Artillery is available, but danger close given the patrol's movement. The patrol is on its own. They fight for 11 minutes. It feels like 11 hours. Williams' sense of time distorts. Everything happens in slow motion and too fast simultaneously. They bound 200 meters through the jungle. Williams' magazine runs dry. He drops it without looking. Slaps in a fresh one. His hands are moving automatically. Training. Muscle memory. The enemy is pursuing, but cautiously. They've learned that SAS patrols bite hard even when wounded. So they track, harass, wait for a mistake. The patrol doesn't make mistakes. They break contact in thick primary jungle where pursuit becomes impossible. They go to ground in a hasty defensive position. Form a circle, all weapons facing out. Foster is treated immediately. Morphine, field dressings. The round went through his calf muscle without hitting bone or major arteries. He's lucky, but he needs evacuation within 24 hours or infection will set in. Williams gets back on the radio. 1 wounded requiring extraction. Enemy contact broken, but probably still being tracked. Weather unsuitable for immediate extraction. The task force commander makes a decision. A helicopter will attempt extraction at first light when the weather might break. The patrol needs to move to a suitable landing zone and hold through the night. They move 2 kilometers in darkness through monsoon rain. Every meter is agony for Foster. Davies and another trooper take turns carrying him. They reach a small clearing that can accommodate 1 helicopter. Barely. They set up a defensive perimeter. Dig shallow fighting positions. Establish fields of fire. Pre-position ammunition and grenades. Williams calls in artillery defensive targets. Pre-planned fire missions that can be triggered instantly if the perimeter is breached. The night is endless. Rain falls in sheets. They hear movement in the jungle around them. Not close, maybe 70 meters, but persistent. Circling. The enemy is tracking them, waiting for dawn to launch a coordinated assault, waiting to see if a helicopter attempts extraction so they can shoot it down. Williams whispers on the radio every hour, updating status. Still secure. Still holding. Enemy still present. He requests constant artillery harassment fire throughout the night. Every 30 minutes, 6 rounds land 200 meters out. The message is clear. We know you're there. We can reach you. Back off. At 05:30, dawn begins to gray the eastern sky. The rain has reduced to a drizzle. The cloud ceiling lifts slightly. Williams hears the helicopter before he sees it. A single Iroquois from 9 Squadron RAF. The pilot is either insane or heroic. Probably both. He's flying below the cloud deck through mountainous terrain with visibility measured in meters. The helicopter descends toward the clearing, comes in fast and steep. Enemy fire erupts from the tree line. Green tracers, AK rounds, cross the landing zone in streams. The door gunner returns fire with his M60. Long bursts, sweeping the tree line. Brass casings rain onto the clearing. The pilot holds steady, doesn't flinch, doesn't abort. The patrol sprints for the helicopter carrying Foster. They throw him aboard, climb in after. Davies is last. He turns and fires his entire magazine back at the tree line before diving through the door. The helicopter lifts immediately, pulls maximum power, and goes straight up through the narrow gap in the canopy. The aircraft takes hits in the tail boom. 2 rounds punch through aluminum. 1 severs a hydraulic line. The pilot compensates, keeps flying. 2 minutes later, they're clear. 5 minutes later, they're above the clouds. 10 minutes later, they land at Nui Dat. Foster will keep his leg. The patrol will fly another day. But the mission isn't finished. They didn't find the rice cache. The ant line is still active. And they've just learned that even the quiet tigers can be trapped if you're patient enough. If you're willing to track them for days. The tactical dynamics have shifted. The hunters have become the hunted. December 1970. The monsoon has turned Phuoc Thi province into liquid mud. Everything is wet, rotting, covered in fungus. Operations continue, but at reduced tempo. The Australian 8th Battalion has withdrawn. The base is visibly emptier. Political pressure in Canberra and Wellington is mounting for complete withdrawal. Everyone knows the war is lost. The question is whether the withdrawal will be orderly or catastrophic. Whether the South Vietnamese government survives 6 months or 6 weeks. The SAS keeps patrolling. Because that's what they do. Because if they stop, the enemy will interpret it as weakness. Because 26 men can still impose a cost that makes the Viet Cong planners think twice. Williams is back in the bush 2 weeks after the ambush. Different patrol area. Different mission. Same enemy. They're inserted using a new variation, landing at 3 separate zones simultaneously with 3 different patrols. Only one carries the actual reconnaissance element. The other 2 are infantry with orders to patrol noisily, then extract. The enemy can't watch all 3. The deception is layered now. More complex. Every tactic that worked last month needs modification this month. The patrol spends 9 days in the Nui Mai Tau foothills. They locate 2 rice caches, one containing approximately 3 tons. They map 3 supply routes with precision. They identify a bunker complex that appears to be a battalion headquarters. They don't engage. They watch. They document. They photograph. They transmit coordinates. 3 days after they extract, the bunker complex is hit by B-52 strikes from 30,000 feet. Arc-light mission. The aircraft are so high the enemy never hears them. Just the sudden arrival of dozens of 500-pound bombs that turn jungle into moonscape. Everything within a kilometer radius ceases to exist. This is the chess game. The SAS provides the intelligence. The conventional forces provide the violence. Together, they create a system that denies the enemy freedom of movement. That makes them paranoid. That forces them to constantly relocate. The operational statistics tell one story. Operations Kung Chung 2 and 3 result in 36 enemy confirmed killed and 52 likely killed. Over 30 weapons captured. Tons of rice destroyed. Multiple cache sites eliminated. But Williams knows the real story is what doesn't happen. The villages along routes 2, 15, 23 aren't taxed by the Viet Cong during this period. The rice harvest proceeds without mass confiscation. The farmers keep enough to feed their families. District officials aren't assassinated. The schools remain open. The roads remain open. Buses run their routes. Market days happen without incident. This is the silence the SAS buys with 155 patrols into hostile territory, with 14 months of walking through minefields, with the constant risk and the occasional gunfight. It's not victory. It's time. Time for South Vietnamese forces to improve. Time for political negotiations in Paris to continue. Time for the withdrawal to be executed without panic or massacre. Time for an orderly transition instead of collapse. For troop finishes their rotation in January 1971. 14 months in country. Some men have completed 2 full tours. 3 tours. All of them are exhausted in ways sleep won't fix. The jungle has marked them permanently. Scars from thorns and leeches. Chronic ear infections from constant wetness. Skin rot. Fungal infections that will recur for years. The hypervigilance that never fully switches off. Their final combat action occurs on February 4th, 1971. A patrol northwest of Thua Tich makes contact with 2 Viet Cong moving through the bush. Brief firefight at 20 meters. Both enemy killed. It's almost anticlimactic. After months of elaborate insertions and mines and ambushes and artillery missions, the last contact is a chance encounter that's over in seconds. The patrol extracts. Returns to Nui Dat. Cleans weapons one final time. Packs their gear. Says goodbye to the Australian squadron. Boards the transport aircraft. And leaves Vietnam. In later years, Vietnamese military historians will write about the Australian and New Zealand SAS with a mixture of professional respect and residual fear. They'll describe units that moved like wind through grass and struck with the precision of surgical knives. They'll note that areas patrolled by the SAS required triple the normal security forces. They'll admit the presence of SAS reconnaissance fundamentally altered their operational planning throughout 1970 and 1971. The Quiet Tigers earned their name in blood and silence. Williams returns to New Zealand in February 1971. He'll serve another 12 years in the SAS before retiring to civilian life. He buys a small farm outside Auckland. Doesn't talk much about Vietnam. When pressed by journalists, he'll say only that they did their job, that the men beside him were the finest soldiers he ever knew, and that when you walk point through a minefield every single day for 14 months, everything after feels easy. The operational analysis produced by Australian military intelligence is clinical. It measures patrol frequency, enemy casualties, weapons captured, rice denied. It concludes that Operations Kung Chung 2 and 3 achieved their stated objectives. Mission accomplished. But the analysis doesn't measure what matters. It doesn't measure the courage required to step off a helicopter into a landing zone knowing the enemy might be watching. It doesn't measure the trust required to let another man walk point while you follow exactly in his footsteps through a minefield. It doesn't measure the weight of leading men into situations where survival odds decrease with every patrol. It doesn't measure the cost of coming home when friends don't. It doesn't measure silence. The silence in Hoa Long village where families harvest rice without confiscation. The silence on Route 2 where civilian buses travel without hitting mines. The silence in jungle camps where Viet Cong logistics planners realize their supply lines are compromised by an enemy they can't see or catch or predict. This is the legacy of 4 Troop, New Zealand Special Air Service. Not the 36 enemy killed, not the captured weapons or destroyed caches or successful patrols. Those are just numbers. The legacy is the time they bought, the orderly withdrawal they enabled, the proof that even in a losing war, professionals can complete their mission with honor and precision. 26 men, 155 patrols, 14 months in the shadow of the Nui Mai Tao Mountains. They didn't win the Vietnam War. No one did. But they won every single patrol that mattered. They brought their men home. They completed the mission. They denied the enemy victory during the one period when it mattered most, the withdrawal. Chen returns to his family in Auckland, takes off his jungle boots for the last time, places them carefully in the back of a closet, closes the door, doesn't look at them for 3 years. When he finally opens that closet again, those boots are still caked with red Vietnamese mud that never fully washed out. Williams switches off his radio on the flight out of Saigon. The constant static and squelch and distant voices cut to silence instantly. After 14 months of whispered transmissions and artillery coordinates and extraction requests, the silence is louder than he expected, louder than the aircraft engines, louder than anything. He leaves the radio off for the entire flight home. When 4 Troop walks out of that jungle for the last time in January 1971, they leave behind more than footprints. They leave behind a silence that speaks louder than any victory parade. A silence that says, "We were here. We did our job. We completed the mission." The quiet tigers don't roar. They whisper. And 50 years later, the whisper still echoes through military history, still gets studied at staff colleges, still gets taught to young reconnaissance soldiers learning their craft, still stands as proof that small teams of professionals can achieve strategic effects far beyond their numbers. The whisper echoes through history, and it always will. 5 men lie frozen in elephant grass, breathing through their noses, a small stone tucked under each tongue. Behind them, 8 kilometers to the south, friendly artillery batteries are zeroing coordinates. Ahead, through the bamboo, they can hear sandals on dirt, enemy soldiers moving toward the ambush site their battalion will occupy at dawn. Sergeant Graham Campbell's hand hovers over his radio. One whispered word, and the artillery will fire. But the grid square they're sitting in is still marked as a no-fire zone. If headquarters forgot to update the map, the next salvo will land on their heads. If he reports the enemy position, the radio transmission might give them away. If he stays silent, 200 of his countrymen will walk into a killing ground tomorrow morning. He has 30 seconds to decide. And whatever he decides, no one will ever know. In the final phase of the Vietnam War, 5-man New Zealand SAS patrols operated in the 5 kilometers of jungle between the artillery and the mines, where the wrong decision meant annihilation by either side. August 1970. Phuoc Thi Province, South Vietnam. The war has changed. General Creighton Abrams has abandoned the body count strategies of his predecessor. The new doctrine has an academic name, Vietnamization and pacification, but the tactical reality is simple. Pin the enemy between the villages and the jungle. Starve them. Wait for them to come to you. Then crush them. For the 1st Australian Task Force at Nui Dat, this means a fundamental problem. 3 infantry battalions, over 2,000 men, are now deployed in static cordons around highways and rice fields. They are visible, predictable, loud. The enemy, the D445 Provincial Battalion and the D65 Engineer Battalion, know exactly where the Australians and New Zealanders are at all times. But the Allies have no idea where the enemy is. The Viet Cong move at night through triple canopy rainforest where visibility drops to 5 meters. They slip between the gaps in the Allied cordon, collect rice and taxes from the villages, plant anti-personnel mines on the tracks the battalions will patrol the next morning, then vanish back into the Hat Dike. Over 50% of all Allied casualties in Phuoc Thi are now caused by mines. Not firefights, mines. The infantry battalions need something else. They need a forward screen, human sensors, a reconnaissance force that can operate in the gray zone between the friendly lines and the enemy sanctuary. They need the Special Air Service. Specifically, they need 4 Troop, New Zealand Special Air Service. 25 men, 5 patrols of 5. No armor, no heavy weapons, no illusions about their survival if things go wrong. Their mission is operationally simple and tactically impossible. Insert by helicopter into the jungle corridors ahead of the battalion sweeps. Establish hidden observation posts. Watch the trails. Identify enemy mine-laying teams before the devices go into the ground. Report enemy movements so artillery can engage. Do not be seen. Do not be heard. Do not compromise. The margin for error is 0. Captain Gray Shaki commands 4 Troop in August 1970. He is 31 years old. He has been running patrols in Phuoc Thi for 18 months. He knows the sound a Viet Cong sandal makes on wet bamboo versus dry. He knows the smell of fish sauce from a VC ration cache versus the smell of a village cooking fire. He knows that the enemy has learned to track Allied patrols by following the scent of American soap and the high-protein sweat of Western soldiers who drink too much water. Shaki's philosophy is unforgiving because he has buried men who were careless. Reduce the human signature to nothing. Carry a stone in your mouth to control thirst. Sip water only at night. Urinate sparingly because the ammonia smell can be detected by dogs or experienced trackers. Freeze at the slightest sound. If you move and the enemy sees you, everyone dies. If you call for helicopter extraction and the enemy hears the radio transmission, everyone dies. If you engage the enemy and the firefight gives away your position, everyone dies. The only way to survive is to become invisible. On August 3, 1970, Operation Kung Chung 2 launches. Kung Chung means togetherness in Vietnamese. The name is propaganda. The operation is a siege. The 2nd Battalion Royal Australian Regiment / New Zealand Infantry Regiment, 2RAR / New Zealand, deploys along Route 15, the main highway into the western sector. The 7th Battalion Royal Australian Regiment takes the eastern highways. The 8th Battalion secures the center. The 3 battalions form a cordon 5 kilometers deep around the villages of Hoa Long, Dat Du, and Xuyen Moc. The idea is geometric. The villages are the enemy's supply base. The jungle is the enemy's sanctuary. If you can physically block the trails between the two, you starve the main force units in the mountains. But there is a flaw in the geometry. The cordon has edges. The edges have flanks. The flanks have gaps. And the Viet Cong, who have been fighting in Phuoc Thai since 1960, know where every gap is. This is where 4 Troop goes. On August 7th, a patrol from 4 Troop inserts into a landing zone 5 kilometers northwest of the 2RAR / New Zealand cordon. The helicopter touches down for 11 seconds. 5 men jump into waist-high grass. The helicopter lifts. The patrol becomes stone. They lie in the grass for 43 minutes, counting time, counting heartbeats, listening for the sound of an enemy tracker team moving toward the landing zone, listening for the metallic click of an AK-47 safety being disengaged, listening for the rustle of vegetation that is not wind. Nothing. The patrol leader, Sergeant Graham Campbell, gestures. The team moves into the jungle. They move in single file, 5 meters apart. The lead scout uses a machete only when absolutely necessary. Cutting vegetation creates noise and leaves a trail. Instead, they push through gaps, step over logs, avoid breaking branches. Every footfall is deliberate. Every breath is controlled. By nightfall, they have moved 800 meters. In open terrain, this would take 12 minutes. In triple canopy rainforest, ahead of a battalion sweep, it takes 7 hours. They establish a patrol base in a thicket of bamboo. No talking. Hand signals only. The base is a circle roughly 10 meters in diameter. Each man faces outward. Rucksacks are placed in the center. Weapons are kept on safe, but within instant reach. They eat cold rations. They do not brew tea. The smell of hexamine fuel tablets can travel 300 meters downwind. At 02:30 in the morning, Trooper Bill Tare, the lead scout, hears movement. He does not move his head. He shifts only his eyes. Through the bamboo, 20 meters away, he sees shapes. For men, Viet Cong. They are carrying canvas bags and a wooden crate. The lead VC is using a red-filtered flashlight, checking the trail for signs of recent passage. Tare's heart rate does not increase. He is trained for this. He counts the enemy. For confirmed. Possibly more in trail. He watches their weapons. 3 AK-47s. One man has a pistol, likely an officer or a sapper cadre. He watches their direction of travel. North, toward the Hat Dike. Away from the 2RAR cordon. The enemy moves on. 30 seconds later, they are gone. Campbell waits 10 minutes. Then he keys his radio, whispers into the handset. One word. Contact. The radio call from the patrol goes to the SAS Squadron Operations Center at Nui Dat. The operations officer plots the reported position on a topographic map. He cross-references it with intelligence from 547 Signal Troop, the radio research unit. 547 has been intercepting coded transmissions from the Chao Duc District Company for the past week. Direction-finding equipment has triangulated the transmitter to a 1-kilometer grid square. The patrol's contact is inside that grid square. This is not coincidence. This is fusion. The operations officer contacts the Artillery Fire Direction Center. He requests a fire mission. The coordinates are relayed to 101 Field Battery. Within 6 minutes, 3 rounds of high explosive airburst above the jungle canopy 800 meters north of the patrol's position. The patrol hears them. A dull crump. Then another. Then the pressure wave through the trees. At dawn, the patrol moves to the impact site. They find blood trails, shrapnel-shredded canvas bags, a wooden crate containing 12 anti-tank mines, Chinese Type 69s. The mines were destined for Route 15. Tomorrow, a 2RAR company was scheduled to patrol that route. Campbell radios the find. The artillery strike has killed or wounded the mine-laying team and destroyed the cache. The patrol has just saved an unknown number of lives. They will never know how many. They will never meet the infantry soldiers who did not step on those mines. This is the silent war. By mid-August, the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army units in Phuoc Thi have adapted. They know the SAS is operating ahead of the battalion sweeps. They begin moving in smaller groups. They avoid trails during the day. They post sentries at stream crossings and jungle junctions. They set their own ambushes for the reconnaissance patrols. On August 21st, a 4-troop patrol is compromised. The details are fragmentary. The patrol is operating northeast of Thua Tich, screening the flank of a 7th Battalion Royal Australian Regiment sweep. At 11:45 in the morning, the patrol detects movement. A large group, possibly a platoon, 30 to 40 enemy soldiers. The patrol goes to ground, concealed in a depression behind a fallen log. The enemy force moves closer. They are not using a trail. They are moving cross-country, in tactical formation, weapons at the ready. The lead scout is sweeping the jungle with his eyes, looking for signs of Allied presence. The SAS patrol becomes terrain. The lead enemy soldier stops. He is looking directly at the log where the patrol is hiding. He cannot see them, but he senses something. He raises his hand. The enemy column stops. 37 seconds of silence. Then the enemy scout moves on. The column follows. The patrol waits. 20 minutes later, Campbell reports the contact. He knows this position will be empty by dawn. He also knows the enemy might leave a tracker behind. He radios anyway. An airstrike is called. 2 F-4 Phantoms drop 500-pound bombs into the reported enemy position. The patrol hears the explosions. They do not know the result. This is the psychological burden of the screen. You are a sensor, not a combatant. Your job is to see without being seen, report without being compromised, survive without killing unless there is no other choice. But the geometry is tightening. As Operation Kung Chung 2 progresses through late August and into September, the battalion sweeps move deeper into contested terrain. 2RAR/New Zealand pushes west toward the Marong SAS Special Zone, a tidal mangrove swamp that serves as a primary infiltration corridor for North Vietnamese supplies arriving from the coast. The Marong SAS is claustrophobic. Visibility drops to 3 meters. Movement is reduced to a crawl through chest-deep mud. The enemy has mortar teams hidden in the mangroves, emerging at night to fire on Route 15, then vanishing. 4-troop patrols are tasked with screening the mangrove fringe. This is nightmare terrain. The tidal cycle means that trails passable at low tide are submerged at high tide. The mud sucks at boots. Every step makes noise. The smell of rotting vegetation is overpowering, masking human scent, but also masking the smell of the enemy. A patrol inserts into a nipa palm thicket on the edge of the Marong SAS on September 3rd. Their mission is to watch a suspected mortar firing position. They dig shallow scrapes in the mud and cover themselves with palm fronds. They wait. For 38 hours, they become part of the landscape. On the second night, they hear voices. Whispering. The enemy mortar team is setting up 70 meters away. The patrol can hear the metallic clang of the mortar base plate being positioned. They can hear the shuffling of ammunition crates. They can hear the team leader issuing instructions in Vietnamese. Campbell faces a decision. If he calls in artillery, the enemy will be destroyed. But the artillery battery is firing in support of 2RAR/New Zealand, which is engaged in a separate contact 3 kilometers south. Diverting the guns means leaving the infantry battalion without fire support. If he waits, the enemy mortar will fire on Route 15, possibly hitting a supply convoy. 23 minutes later, the enemy mortar team fires 4 rounds toward Route 15. The patrol watches the muzzle flashes. They plot the exact firing position. They wait for the enemy to pack up and withdraw. Then Campbell reports the grid coordinates. At dawn, an airstrike destroys the firing position. The enemy team is gone, but the position is unusable. This is not glory. This is math. Deny terrain. Degrade capability. Repeat. On September 20th, Operation Kung Chung 2 officially concludes. The battalions rotate back to Nui Dat for rest and refit. The official after-action reports credit the operation with disrupting enemy logistics and degrading the D445 battalion's combat effectiveness. The reports do not mention the SAS patrols. The reports do not quantify the ambushes prevented, the mines not planted, the artillery strikes enabled. But the war does not stop. During this break, for troop patrols are often the only Allied presence in the contested zones, maintaining surveillance to ensure the enemy does not reoccupy the sanitized villages. This period of isolation is psychologically taxing. The comforting proximity of the infantry hammer is removed. The patrols are alone, deep, operating on their own judgment with no backup plan except the radio and the hope that helicopters can reach them before the enemy does. September 21st. Operation Kung Chung 3 begins. The strategic objective is unchanged. Deny the enemy access to the villages. Starve the main force units in the jungle. Maintain the cordon. But the tactical situation has deteriorated. The 8th Battalion Royal Australian Regiment is withdrawing from Vietnam in October. The task force is reduced to 2 maneuver battalions. The cordon stretches thinner. The gaps widen. The burden on the SAS increases. And in October, for troop undergoes a change of command. Captain Gray Shackey rotates home. He is replaced by Lieutenant Jack Hayes. Hayes is younger, 30 years old. He has been with 4 troop for 9 months, running patrols, but this is his first command. He arrives at a moment of maximum operational tempo. Kung Chung 3 is grinding through its second month. The patrols are exhausted. The enemy is learning. The margins are shrinking. Hayes does not ease the pressure. He increases it. He implements what becomes known as the Hayes Doctrine. Water discipline becomes absolute. Each man carries a small river stone in his mouth during daylight hours to stimulate saliva production and reduce the urge to drink. Water consumption is restricted to night hours only. The rationale is simple. High water intake leads to excessive sweating and urination. Sweat carries the smell of Western diet, high protein, processed sugars. Urine leaves an ammonia signature that enemy trackers and dogs can detect. By reducing water intake, patrols reduce their olfactory footprint. Operating in tropical heat with restricted hydration is brutally taxing. Men lose weight. Concentration suffers. Tempers fray. But compromise is fatal. Hayes has seen what happens when a patrol is detected. In late October, a patrol under Hayes' command inserts into an area northwest of Hoa Long. The intelligence brief is specific. 547 Signal Troop has intercepted communications indicating a resupply meeting at a stream junction. The patrol's mission is to confirm and, if possible, interdict. They move into position over 2 days. On the third night, at 01:15, they hear movement. A large group, possibly 20 men. The enemy is moving in column formation along the stream bank. They are carrying heavy loads, rice bags, ammunition crates, medical supplies. Hayes makes a decision that violates standing doctrine. Instead of observing and reporting, he orders a hasty ambush. The patrol sets up in a line formation along the stream bank. They have 60 seconds. Each man selects his primary target. The lead scout has an M16 rifle with a 20-round magazine. The patrol medic, Tamamaka, has an M79 grenade launcher. Hayes has an M16 and a radio handset clipped to his webbing. The enemy column moves closer. 15 meters. 10. 5. Hayes fires. The rest of the patrol opens fire. The volume of fire is overwhelming. 5 men firing on full automatic into a column of 20 men at point-blank range. The effect is catastrophic. The lead enemy soldiers drop immediately. The column scatters. Some return fire. Muzzle flashes light up the jungle. Tracer rounds ricochet off trees. The firefight lasts 41 seconds. Then silence. The patrol does not wait to confirm kills. They are compromised. The enemy knows their position. Reinforcements will arrive. Hayes radios for extraction. He uses a brevity code. Wildfire. Emergency extraction. Contact imminent. The nearest helicopter gunship, a bushranger crew, is 11 minutes away. The patrol moves 300 meters north, away from the contact site, and establishes a defensive perimeter. They can hear shouting in Vietnamese behind them. The enemy is regrouping. At 0207, the bushranger arrives. The pilot does not have a clear landing zone. The jungle canopy is too thick. He hovers above the trees, lowering a rope ladder. The patrol climbs, one man at a time, while the door gunners fire suppressive bursts into the jungle below. The entire extraction takes 4 minutes and 19 seconds. As the helicopter climbs away, Hayes looks down. He can see muzzle flashes from the tree line. The enemy is firing at the helicopter's exhaust trail. The after-action report credits the patrol with 7 enemy killed in the destruction of a major resupply convoy. But Hayes knows the cost. The enemy now knows the SAS is willing to engage. The psychological advantage of invisibility is partially compromised. From this point forward, enemy units in Phuoc Thai will post security specifically to watch for SAS patrols. The game has changed again. By November, Operation Kung Chung 3 has evolved into a war of attrition between the SAS and the D-65 Engineer Battalion. The mine layers are the highest value targets in the province. Killing a sapper team prevents dozens of mines from being planted. But the D-65 has adapted. They move in smaller groups. They vary their routes. They plant mines during heavy rain when the sound of digging is masked. The SAS counters by increasing patrol tempo. For troop is running continuous operations. A patrol extracts, debriefs, re-equips, and inserts again within 72 hours. Sleep deprivation becomes chronic. Men develop infections from constant immersion in wet jungle. Weight loss is severe, but the operational pressure does not relent. On November 18th, a patrol detects a D-65 team planting mines on a trail near Dat Du. The patrol does not engage. They track the enemy team back to a cache site. The cache contains over 60 mines, blasting caps, and a small workshop for modifying Chinese-manufactured devices. The patrol radios the coordinates. An airstrike destroys the cache. This single interdiction prevents an estimated 40 to 50 Allied casualties. But the cost is accumulating. By December, Troop has been in continuous operations for 5 months. The psychological toll of operating in the buffer zone is severe. The patrols are not just watching for the enemy ahead. They are watching for the friendly artillery behind. The no-fire zones that protect SAS patrols are dynamic. As infantry battalions maneuver, the Artillery Fire Direction Center updates the map in real time. But updates are not instantaneous. There have been near misses. Shells landing within 200 meters of SAS positions. The concussion is terrifying. The knowledge that your own side nearly killed you is corrosive. January 1971. Operation Kung Chung 3 enters its final phase. The political decision has been made. The Australian and New Zealand forces will withdraw from Vietnam. The timeline is not public, but the battalions know. The tone shifts. Operations are no longer about winning. They are about not losing on the way out. But Troop does not ease off. On January 13, 1970, months before Hayes took command, Sergeant Graham Campbell led a 6-man patrol northeast of Nui Dat. They had been on the ground less than 24 hours. Bill Tare was on point, scouting ahead. Then came Campbell, followed by Sid Puya, Greg Sutherland, Tom Amaka, and 19-year-old Warwick McCallion bringing up the rear. The snap of a stick underfoot halted the patrol. Then the distinctive crack of signal fire. The enemy had learned helicopters meant the SAS would be around. They were waiting. Tare crouched and scanned forward. Behind him, Campbell moved to find cover. He was not fast enough. The AK-47 round hit him between the eyes. He crumpled to the ground. Tare, unaware his sergeant had failed to find cover, opened fire. As he heard more fire from behind, he turned to see Campbell down. The first thing Tare thought was the airway. He tried to clear it. His hand came back with what must have been all Campbell's teeth. He put the teeth in his pocket and went to give mouth to mouth. Nothing but froth came out. Knowing he and his men were in trouble, Tare reached for his M34 white phosphorus grenade. He hurled it and ducked. Turning, he saw McCallion hoisting Campbell onto his already loaded pack. The men had a motto: one in all in, one out all out. Campbell would not be left behind. Tare pushed the squad back through the dense forest. As they withdrew, he made a radio alert. The universal signal. Panic button. Bushrangers inbound. They got Campbell out. They got everyone out. But Campbell was the first and only New Zealand SAS soldier killed in action during the Vietnam War. He was 24 years old. He had passed the Vietnamese language course. He was an expert in military intelligence. The Australian SAS squadron commander said that with Campbell's death, the Kiwis lost one of their finest patrol commanders. His death is a reminder of what every patrol knew. One mistake, one moment, one sound, and everything ends. On January 27, 1971, Lieutenant Jack Hayes leads a patrol into an area northwest of Attrition. The intelligence brief is routine. Watch a trail junction. Report any movement. The patrol inserts without incident and establishes a patrol base in heavy bamboo. On the second night, at 03:45, they detect movement. A small group, 5 men. They are moving cautiously, weapons at the ready, checking the trail for signs of Allied presence. These are not logistics porters. These are soldiers. Hayes watches through the bamboo. The enemy patrol stops 15 meters away. The lead soldier is using a flashlight with a red filter, scanning the undergrowth. The beam sweeps across the bamboo thicket where the patrol is hidden. It does not stop. The enemy sees nothing. But one of the enemy soldiers senses something. He whispers to the others. They spread out, forming a skirmish line. They are going to search the thicket. Hayes has 3 options. Engage now and retain the element of surprise. Wait and hope they move on. Call for extraction and risk being detected during the helicopter approach. He chooses engagement. The patrol initiates at 12 meters. The firefight is brief and one-sided. 2 enemy soldiers are killed immediately. The others flee. The patrol does not pursue. They move to an alternate extraction point and are recovered within 30 minutes. This contact, on January 27th, is not the last. On February 4th, 1971, another 4-troop patrol engages a Viet Cong group northwest of Attrition. 2 enemy killed. The patrol extracts without casualties. This is the final recorded contact for 4-troop New Zealand Special Air Service in the Vietnam War. 3 weeks later, the troop boards a C-130 transport aircraft at Vung Tau and flies home. The patrol knows this is the end. Their bodies do not. Operation Kung Chung officially concludes on January 31, 1971. The after-action reports quantify the results. Over 200 enemy killed, 63 weapons captured, 17 cache sites destroyed, hundreds of mines interdicted before emplacement. The reports do not quantify the Allied casualties prevented, the ambushes detected, the artillery strikes enabled, the infantry battalions that moved through contested terrain because a 5-man SAS patrol had been there first, watching, reporting, surviving. The historians who write about the Vietnam War focus on the big battles. The Tet Offensive, Hamburger Hill, the fall of Saigon. They do not write about 5 men lying in elephant grass with stones in their mouths, watching enemy soldiers walk past at 18 meters, deciding not to fire because the mission requires silence. But those 5 men are why the battalions could operate. They were the human sensors, the forward screen, the invisible buffer between the hammer and the enemy. They reduced their biological signature to near zero. They moved through terrain where visibility was 5 meters and sound traveled a kilometer. They operated ahead of friendly artillery that could annihilate them with a single misidentified grid reference. They made decisions in the span of a heartbeat that determined whether 200 men lived or died. This was not glory. This was mathematics and discipline and an almost inhuman capacity for stillness. It was the ability to watch an enemy soldier light a cigarette 10 meters away and not move, not shift, not exist. The legacy of 4-troop in Operations Kung Chung 2 and 3 is not measured in medals or body counts. It is measured in the infantry soldiers who did not step on mines, the convoys that were not ambushed, the villages that remained secure because the enemy could not resupply. It is measured in the silence. Lieutenant Jack Hayes returned to New Zealand in February 1971. He never spoke publicly about the patrols. He retired in 2009 as an Army Major. He continues to work with the New Zealand Defence Force as an advisor on medals policy. Captain Gray Shackey retired from the military. The men who served under them scattered. Some stayed in the military. Some did not. Bill Tare returned home and carried Graham Campbell's teeth in his pocket for years, unable to let go of the man he could not save. Warwick McCallion, who hoisted Campbell onto his pack at 19 years old, carried that weight for the rest of his life. None of them talked about carrying stones in their mouths or lying in wait while enemy patrols walked past. The Vietnam War ended in 1975. The fall of Saigon was televised. The world watched helicopters evacuating the American embassy. The world did not watch 547 Signal Troop pack up their radio intercept equipment. The world did not watch the artillery batteries of 101 Field Battery fire their last mission. The world did not watch the SAS patrols who had spent years operating in the invisible spaces between armies. But the war they fought, the silent war, the war of the screen, the war of discipline over fear, remains a benchmark for Special Forces operations. It demonstrated that tactical advantage does not always come from firepower. Sometimes it comes from 5 men who can make themselves invisible, who can operate for days on restricted water, who can watch the enemy and report without being seen, who can serve as the unseen guardians of the battalions behind them. That is the story of the silent screen and the hammer. The hammer was loud. The hammer was visible. The hammer was 2,000 men with tanks and artillery and helicopters. The screen was 5 men with rifles and radios and the capacity to endure. The hammer could not operate without the screen, and the screen operated knowing that one mistake, one sound, one moment of lost discipline would mean death. They made no mistakes, because mistakes were not an option. The courier was 20 meters ahead of his column when the jungle detonated. 700 steel balls from a claymore mine tore through his chest. His satchel, containing regimental orders, intelligence maps, and the names of South Vietnamese spies, fell into the mud. Before his body stopped twitching, a hand reached out from the undergrowth, grabbed the satchel, and disappeared. The 19 men behind him opened fire. 500 rounds into the tree-line. 3 full minutes of sustained automatic fire. When they stopped, breathing hard, waiting for return fire, they heard nothing. Absolute silence. No muzzle flashes. No movement. No blood trails. No footprints. Nothing. Just the sound of rain starting to fall through the canopy. The Vietnamese gave them a name that night. Marong. The Jungle Phantoms. Between 1968 and 1971, 26 New Zealand soldiers perfected an ambush so terrifying that the Viet Cong placed a $5,000 bounty on each of their heads. They killed at a ratio of 250 to 1. They never lost a man to ambush. And when they struck once, killing one man, taking everything he carried, and vanishing like smoke. This is how they did it. For troop of the New Zealand Special Air Service waged a shadow war in Vietnam, perfecting the single-strike ambush that made them the most feared unit in Phuoc Thi Province, and left the enemy convinced they were fighting ghosts. December 1968. Phuoc Thi Province, South Vietnam. The Americans are drowning in their own doctrine. General William Westmoreland's strategy of attrition has turned Vietnam into an accounting problem. Kill more of them than they kill of you. Measure success in body counts. Send battalions crashing through the jungle, counting corpses, calling it victory. It doesn't work. The North Vietnamese can replace casualties faster than America can inflict them. Every major engagement bleeds American units, while the enemy simply fades into the jungle and recruits more fighters. The Ho Chi Minh Trail keeps pumping supplies south. The villages keep hiding insurgents. The war grinds on. But at Nui Dat, the Australian task force is fighting a different war. They learned it in Malaya, fighting communist insurgents in the 50s. The British called it counter-revolutionary warfare. The concept is simple but brutal. You don't hunt guerrillas with divisions. You hunt them the way they hunt you. 4-man teams. Absolute silence. Weeks in the jungle. You become better predators than the enemy. You deny them sanctuary. You make them afraid of their own terrain. The centerpiece of this strategy is the Special Air Service. In December 1968, for Troop, 1st Ranger Squadron, New Zealand Special Air Service arrives at Nui Dat, 26 men. 1 officer, Captain Bob Mackenzie. 25 other ranks. Sergeants, corporals, troopers. Many of them have already fought in Malaya or Borneo. They've been selected through a training program so brutal that 80% of candidates fail. They can navigate by stars. They can move through jungle without sound. They can read tracks a week old and tell you how many men passed, how heavily loaded they were, and which direction they were traveling. They integrate seamlessly into the Australian Special Air Service squadron rotating through Nui Dat. Together they form an NZSAS force that shares intelligence, helicopters from 9th Squadron Royal Australian Air Force, and artillery support from the New Zealand gunners at Fire Support Base Coral. Their mission is precise. Penetrate the enemy sanctuaries in the Mai Tau Mountains, the Nui Din Hills, and the Hat Dyke Secret Zone. Find the supply trails. Map the bunker complexes. Identify the couriers carrying orders between Viet Cong battalions and the North Vietnamese Command. And when the opportunity presents itself, kill them. Not engage them. Not fight them. Kill one specific man and disappear before the enemy understands what happened. This is hunter-killer warfare. And the New Zealand SAS are about to become the deadliest hunters in Vietnam. The statistics will speak for themselves. 155 patrols over 26 months. 492 confirmed enemy killed across all NZSAS operations. 1 New Zealand SAS combat death. 1. Sergeant Graham Campbell, killed in action on January 14, 1970. 4 wounded. A kill ratio of 250 to 1. But numbers don't capture what made them terrifying. What made them Marong? The Phantoms. What made the Viet Cong commanders offer $5,000 American, more than most Vietnamese would earn in 10 years, for a single SAS trooper, dead or alive. To understand that, you have to understand the ambush. The patrol is 4 men, sometimes 5, never more than 6. Corporal David Chin walks point, 24 years old. His family immigrated from Hong Kong when he was 7. Learned English in Auckland schools while being bullied for looking different. Joined the army at 18. Made it through SAS selection on his 2nd attempt. Now he's walking point in the Hat Dyke, and he's the best tracker in 4 Troop. Behind him, Lance Corporal Davies. Private Michael Foster. Led by Lieutenant James Williams. 24 years old. 3rd tour in Southeast Asia. Already seen 7 men from his original selection course killed or maimed. He understands the mathematics of this war. Every patrol reveals a pattern. Every insertion teaches the enemy something new. Stealth is a depreciating asset. They've been in the jungle for 6 days. They inserted using the cowboy technique. The helicopter landed, 12 men got off. 6 of them immediately ran back and got on the helicopter, which flew away. A Viet Cong observer watching from 300 meters away reported, "False alarm, equipment failure." They left, but 6 men stayed, lying motionless in the undergrowth for 3 hours, barely breathing, while the observer watched the empty landing zone and eventually moved on. Now they're deep in the operational area, moving at 50 meters per hour. Every footstep tested before committing weight. Watching for tripwires. Watching for punji stakes. Watching for the tiny indicators that human beings have passed this way. The bent blade of grass that's been stepped on versus bent by wind. The scuff mark on exposed root. The single boot print in mud that tells you the trail is active. They smell the enemy before they see them. Wood smoke. Someone cooking rice. Williams raises his fist. The patrol freezes. They go to ground and wait. 20 minutes. Listening. Confirming the smoke isn't from a mobile unit, but from a static camp. Now comes the dangerous part. Williams takes Chin forward. They crawl. Full prone through mud and rotting vegetation. 30 minutes to cover 80 meters. The sound of their movement is masked by rain falling through the canopy. They reach a position with clear line of sight. Not a camp. A rest stop. 8 men. Porters carrying rice in burlap sacks. They're exhausted, slumped against trees, eating cold rice balls. There's one AK-47 leaning against a tree. These men think they're safe. They're 20 kilometers from the nearest Allied base, in terrain so difficult that conventional forces never patrol here. But Williams isn't interested in the porters. He's interested in the man sitting slightly apart from the others. Chest webbing different from the rest. Carrying a satchel. Not a porter. A courier. The lifeblood of the insurgency. That satchel contains orders from battalion command to company commanders in the field. Maybe intelligence maps. Maybe payroll. Maybe the names of Viet Cong agents working inside the South Vietnamese government. Williams makes notes on waterproof paper. Sketches the layout. Takes 3 photographs with a cloth-wrapped camera to muffle the shutter sound. Then he crawls back. They could call in artillery. 6 rounds of high explosive from Fire Support Base Coral. The entire rest stop obliterated in 20 seconds. But Williams makes a different calculation. Artillery is loud. Artillery tells every Viet Cong unit within 10 kilometers that the Allies know about this trail. The enemy will shift their routes, change their patterns. and that courier's satchel will be destroyed in the blast. Williams wants that satchel intact. He wants the courier dead and the intelligence in his hands before the enemy understands they're under attack. So he sets the ambush. The patrol moves parallel to the trail, staying 60 meters off in thick cover. They're ahead of the porter column now, waiting for them to finish resting and continue their journey. The porters will walk single file. The courier will be near the front or the rear, somewhere he can communicate quickly with the column leader if they're compromised. Williams picks the ambush site with surgical precision, a choke point where the trail narrows between two massive trees. The vegetation is thick enough to provide cover, but thin enough to allow clean fields of fire. He positions his men in an L shape, Davies and Foster covering the kill zone from the left, Chen positioned to grab the satchel, Williams holding the Claymore detonator. The M1801 Claymore mine is the perfect weapon for this work. 700 steel balls backed by 1.5 pounds of C4 explosive. Effective kill radius, 50 meters in a 60-degree arc. Most importantly, when it detonates, it doesn't reveal the shooter's exact position the way a muzzle flash does. The enemy knows where the mine is. They don't know where you are. Williams has positioned the Claymore to specifically target the front of the column, where the courier walks. They wait. 1 hour. 2 hours. In the jungle, patience is a weapon. You don't move. You don't scratch the mosquito biting your neck. You don't adjust your position when your leg cramps. You become part of the environment. A log, a rock, a shadow. The enemy has learned to watch for signs of ambush. They look for disturbed vegetation. They look for the glint of metal. They listen for the click of a safety being switched off. The New Zealand SAS have countered every indicator. Their weapons are wrapped in cloth. Their gear is taped down to prevent noise. They've controlled their breathing to match the rhythm of the jungle. They don't smell like humans anymore. 6 days without bathing, uniforms washed only in water, they smell like rotten leaves and sweat. They smell like the jungle. The porter column appears. The courier walks third in line. Chest webbing, satchel across his shoulder. AK-47 held casually. Behind him, 17 men carrying rice bags. They're talking quietly among themselves, exhausted from days of humping supplies through the mountains, not expecting contact this deep in their own territory. Williams watches through the undergrowth, waits for the courier to enter the kill zone, waits for him to step between the two trees where the Claymore is positioned. His thumb is on the detonator. The clacker, a small handheld device that generates an electrical charge when you squeeze it 3 times in rapid succession. The courier is 10 meters away. 5 meters. He steps into the kill zone. Williams squeezes the clacker. The jungle detonates. The blast is a physical force, a wall of pressure and noise and steel that shreds everything in its path. The courier is thrown backward, his chest opened by dozens of ball bearings. The man behind him goes down screaming. The third man stumbles and falls. The rest of the column drops flat and starts firing wildly. But the New Zealand SAS aren't where the Viet Cong think they are. Chen is already moving. While the enemy is still deafened by the blast, still confused, still trying to understand where the attack came from, he sprints forward, grabs the satchel from the dead courier's body, sprints back. For seconds, the patrol opens fire. Not sustained. Not a firefight. A single disciplined volley. 6 rounds from Williams. A burst from Davies. Chen firing the bitch, his modified L101 rifle with full automatic capability, sweeping the tree line. 15 seconds of overwhelming violence. Then they stop. Complete silence. This is the moment that breaks the enemy's mind. The Viet Cong are lying flat, expecting return fire to their own shooting, expecting the ambush to develop into a firefight, expecting grenades, expecting the attackers to assault through their position the way American infantry would. Instead, they hear nothing. Just rain, just wind, just the jungle. The survivors start firing again, spraying the undergrowth with automatic fire. 500 rounds. 1,000 rounds. Tracers cutting through the vegetation. They're shooting at ghosts. Because the New Zealand SAS are already gone. They've executed the withdrawal before the first Viet Cong finger found a trigger. They're 60 meters away now, moving at a fast walk, putting distance between themselves and the kill zone. They're not running. Running makes noise. Running leaves tracks. They're moving with the same discipline they used approaching the ambush. Each man following exactly in the footsteps of the man ahead, stepping on roots and rocks to avoid leaving boot prints in the mud. Behind them, the Viet Cong survivors are calling for help, screaming into radios. A tracking team will arrive within an hour, and they'll find nothing, because Williams has one more trick. 200 meters from the ambush site, he sets a hasty ambush on their own back trail. This is called fishhooking. The patrol loops 180 degrees and sets up in the thick vegetation overlooking their own tracks. If the Viet Cong tracking team tries to follow them, they'll walk directly into a second ambush. This makes pursuit a death sentence. The enemy learns quickly. Following the phantoms means dying. So they stop following. The patrol continues withdrawing. They reach a pre-planned extraction 0.4 kilometers away. Call for helicopter pickup. Williams opens the courier's satchel while they wait. Inside, a map showing Viet Cong supply caches in the Mae Tao Mountains. Orders for an attack on a South Vietnamese district headquarters. A list of 17 names, local civilians suspected of being Viet Cong sympathizers, marked for recruitment, and payroll records showing which hamlet chiefs are taking money from the insurgents. This single ambush has just compromised an entire regimental operation. The supply caches will be destroyed by artillery before the week ends. The district headquarters will reinforce its defenses. The 17 names will be investigated. The corrupt hamlet chiefs will be removed. 1 courier killed. 19 men terrorized. An entire enemy operation unraveled. This is why the New Zealand SAS don't chase body counts. They chase intelligence. Every courier dead is worth 10 fighters dead. Every satchel captured is worth a company-sized engagement. They're not fighting a tactical war. They're fighting a strategic war. And they're winning. The enemy starts calling them Marong after the 3rd month of operations. The jungle phantoms. Ghosts who kill and vanish. It begins as superstition. Vietnamese culture has deep roots in ancestor worship and spirits. The jungle itself is considered alive, a realm where the boundary between the physical and spiritual is thin. When men are killed by invisible attackers who leave no trace, who make no sound, who seem to know where you're going before you arrive, the explanation feels supernatural. But the terror of the Marong isn't based on superstition. It's based on operational reality. The New Zealand SAS have made themselves functionally invisible. They've mastered what the military calls scent discipline. No soap, no shaving cream, no deodorant, nothing with a manufactured smell. They eat the same rations every day to control their digestive odors. They urinate and defecate far from patrol routes and bury it. After a week in the jungle, they don't smell like foreigners anymore. They smell like rotting vegetation and human sweat. The enemy's tracking dogs can't pick up their scent against the background odor of the jungle. They've mastered visual camouflage beyond anything the Viet Cong have encountered. Their uniforms are chosen for specific terrain. They attach local vegetation to their webbing every morning, replacing it throughout the day as it wilts. They've learned to move without creating the visual cues that betray human presence. They don't disturb spiderwebs. They don't break branches. They don't leave scuff marks on exposed roots. A Viet Cong tracker can pass within 5 meters of a New Zealand SAS patrol lying in ambush and see nothing but jungle. They've mastered sound discipline to a degree that seems impossible. They communicate by hand signals. Their radios use whisper microphones pressed directly against the throat, transmitting vibrations through bone rather than air. They've trained themselves to control their breathing. For men can lie in the undergrowth for 3 hours and you'll hear nothing but the ambient noise of the jungle. But the real genius is in their tactics. The one-strike ambush isn't random. It's calculated psychological warfare. By killing one man, usually the courier or the officer, and then vanishing, the New Zealand SAS create maximum uncertainty. The survivors don't know if they've just been hit by a 4-man patrol or if they're about to be annihilated by a company-sized force. They don't know if the ambush is over or if it's just beginning. They freeze. They call for reinforcements. They deploy defensive perimeters. They waste days sweeping the area for a large allied force that doesn't exist. For men have just pinned down 200. This is force multiplication through psychological dominance. The Viet Cong High Command recognizes the threat. Intelligence captured later in the war reveals they placed a specific bounty on SAS troopers. $5,000 American for a confirmed kill or capture. That's more than they offered for regular infantry. More than they offered for officers. It's a recognition that these 26 men are disrupting operations across an entire province. And the bounty makes them even more terrifying, because nobody collects it. January 14th, 1970. Bintai Province. Sergeant Graham Campbell is leading a patrol through thick jungle east of the Maytown Mountains. Campbell is 32 years old, a veteran of Malaya, respected by every man in 4 Troop. He's the kind of NCO who leads from the front, who never asks his men to do anything he wouldn't do himself. His patrol has been tracking a Viet Cong supply column for 2 days. They've identified a cache site and are moving to establish an observation post when they make contact. Not an ambush, a meeting engagement. Both sides stumble onto each other at 20 meters in thick vegetation. The worst-case scenario. The firefight is immediate and brutal. AK-47 rounds crack overhead. Campbell's patrol returns fire, executing the contact front drill they've rehearsed 1,000 times. They lay down suppressive fire and begin bounding backward, trying to break contact. Campbell is hit in the initial exchange. The round strikes him in the chest. He goes down. His patrol doesn't break, doesn't run. They form a defensive perimeter around their fallen sergeant and fight. Lance Corporal Davies drags Campbell back while the others provide covering fire. They're outnumbered. The Viet Cong force is larger than expected, possibly a platoon-sized element. But the New Zealand SAS hold their ground long enough to call for helicopter extraction. The gunship arrives 15 minutes later, door gunners blazing. The patrol fights their way to the landing zone, carrying Campbell. They load him onto the aircraft. The pilot pulls maximum power, and they're gone. Campbell dies before they reach the hospital. He is the first and only New Zealand SAS soldier killed in combat in Vietnam. The impact on 4 Troop is profound. These men have spent months being called ghosts, being told they're invisible, being described as invincible. Campbell's death shatters that illusion. It reminds them that they're human, that they bleed, that the enemy can kill them if they make even a small mistake. But it doesn't stop them. Campbell's funeral is held at Nui Dat. The entire Australian task force attends. The eulogy is brief, military, professional, but everyone in 4 Troop understands what isn't being said. Graham Campbell died doing the most dangerous job in the most dangerous war. He died protecting his men. He died because someone had to walk point. Someone had to be first through the door. Someone had to lead. After the funeral, 4 Troop goes back to work. They don't modify their tactics. They don't become cautious. If anything, they become more aggressive. Because that's what Campbell would have wanted. Because stopping would dishonor his sacrifice. Because the mission doesn't stop for grief. Over the next 12 months, they'll conduct 60 more patrols. They'll kill dozens more enemy soldiers. They'll capture hundreds of intelligence documents. They'll identify cache sites that will be destroyed by artillery and airstrikes. And they'll bring every man home alive. Graham Campbell's death wasn't meaningless. It was the price of waging this kind of war. And his men paid that price willingly, knowing that what they were doing mattered. February 4th, 1971. Northwest of Thua Tich Village. The war is ending. Not with victory, but with political decisions made in Washington and Canberra. The Australian task force is withdrawing. The New Zealand government has decided to pull 4 Troop. The strategic situation is clear. South Vietnam will fall. The only question is when. But the mission doesn't stop just because the politicians have given up. A patrol from 4 Troop is moving through secondary jungle, tracking a supply trail that intelligence believes connects to a major cache site. They've been in the field for 8 days. This is their last operational patrol before heading home. Last chance to gather intelligence. Last chance to disrupt the enemy. Last chance to prove that even in a losing war, professionals can do their job with precision and honor. The patrol spots movement. 2 Viet Cong fighters moving along the trail. Not a large force. Not a high-value target. Just 2 men trying to survive the same way everyone else is. The patrol commander makes the decision to engage. It's a clean ambush. Textbook execution. The enemy walks into the kill zone. The claymore detonates. Both men go down. The patrol moves forward to verify the kills and search for intelligence. One of the fighters is carrying documents, routine supply requisitions, nothing critical. But it doesn't matter. The patrol has done its job. They withdraw, call for extraction, load onto the helicopter, return to Nui Dat. It's over in 3 minutes. This is the final combat action of the New Zealand Special Air Service in Vietnam. Not a dramatic last stand, not a heroic sacrifice, just a perfectly executed tactical operation that kills 2 enemy soldiers and extracts without casualties. It's so routine that it barely merits a paragraph in the operational log. But it's perfect poetry, because that's what the New Zealand SAS did for 26 months. They executed small, precise operations with surgical skill. They killed the enemy one man at a time, taking their intelligence and vanishing before anyone could respond. They terrified an entire insurgency not through massive firepower, but through invisible precision. They became ghosts not through mythology, but through tactical perfection. For Troop boards the transport aircraft in late February 1971. 26 men minus 1. Graham Campbell stays behind, buried in the military cemetery at Tarandak in Malaysia. The rest go home. They carry with them memories that will never fully fade. The sound of rain falling through triple canopy jungle. The smell of wood smoke from a Viet Cong cooking fire. The feeling of lying motionless in the mud for 3 hours while the enemy walks past 10 meters away. The split-second decision to squeeze the clacker and blow someone's world apart. The silence that follows. The endless, suffocating silence. They carry the knowledge that they were the best at what they did. That they fought a war everyone knew was lost, and still won every single engagement that mattered. That they protected each other. That they brought their men home. That they completed the mission. They carry the scars. Chronic ear infections from constant moisture. Fungal infections that will recur for years. Skin rot. The hypervigilance that never fully switches off. The way they scan rooms for exits. The way they can't sit with their back to a door. The way loud noises make them flinch. Lieutenant James Williams returns to New Zealand. Buys a farm outside Auckland. Doesn't talk much about Vietnam. When journalists ask, he says only that they did their job. That the men beside him were the finest soldiers he ever knew. That he'd have followed them anywhere. Corporal David Chun returns to his family. Takes off his jungle boots for the last time. Places them in the back of a closet. Closes the door. Doesn't look at them for 3 years. When he finally opens that closet again, the boots are still caked with red Vietnamese mud that never fully washed out. The operational statistics are clinical. Dispassionate. 155 patrols. 492 enemy confirmed killed across all NZSAS operations. 30 weapons captured. Tons of rice destroyed. Multiple cache sites eliminated. A kill ratio of 250 to 1. Mission accomplished. But the statistics don't measure what matters. They don't measure the courage required to step off a helicopter into a landing zone, knowing the enemy might be watching from 300 meters away. They don't measure the trust required to let another man walk point while you follow in his footsteps through a minefield. They don't measure the weight of leading men into situations where survival odds decrease with every patrol. They don't measure the cost of coming home when friends don't. They don't measure silence. Years later, Vietnamese military historians will write about the NZSAS with a mixture of professional respect and residual fear. They'll describe units that moved like wind through grass and struck with the precision of surgical knives. They'll admit that areas patrolled by the SAS required triple the normal security forces. They'll acknowledge that SAS reconnaissance fundamentally altered their operational planning throughout 1970 and 1971. The Marong earned their name in blood and silence. But the real legacy isn't in enemy accounts. It's in what didn't happen. The villages along routes 2, 15, and 23 weren't taxed by the Viet Cong during the period when 4 Troop was active. The rice harvest proceeded without mass confiscation. Farmers kept enough to feed their families. District officials weren't assassinated. Schools remained open. Roads remained open for civilian traffic. Buses ran their routes. Market days happened without incident. This is the silence the New Zealand SAS bought with 26 months of walking through minefields. With 155 patrols into hostile territory. With the constant risk and the occasional gunfight and the one man who didn't come home. It's not victory. It's time. Time for South Vietnamese forces to improve. Time for political negotiations to continue. Time for the withdrawal to be executed without panic or massacre. Time for an orderly transition instead of collapse. The New Zealand Special Air Service didn't win the Vietnam War. Nobody did. The war was lost before they arrived and remained lost after they left. But they won every single patrol that mattered. They denied the enemy during the one period when it was critical, the withdrawal. They proved that even in a losing war, professionals can complete their mission with honor and precision. 26 men, 155 patrols, 26 months in the shadow of the Mae Tao Mountains. They became phantoms because they had to. Because 4 men can't fight 200 and win unless those 200 believe they're fighting something supernatural. Because the only way to survive that deep in enemy territory is to make the enemy afraid to follow you, afraid to track you, afraid to engage you, afraid of the silence after you strike. The Viet Cong called them Marong, the jungle phantoms. They offered $5,000 for a single SAS trooper, dead or alive. Nobody ever collected, because you can't kill a ghost. And 50 years later, the legend still haunts military history. The New Zealand SAS operations in Vietnam are still studied at staff colleges, still taught to reconnaissance soldiers learning their craft, still referenced in operational planning as the gold standard for small team deep reconnaissance in hostile territory. The phantoms of Phuoc Thi don't fade. They killed 1 man and disappeared. They took his secrets. They left behind nothing but silence and fear. They fought a war that everyone knew was lost and still won every engagement. They brought their men home. They completed the mission. And when they walked out of that jungle for the last time in February 1971, they left behind a silence that speaks louder than any victory parade. A silence that says, "We were here. We did our job. We were the best at what we did. And the enemy will remember." The jungle phantoms don't roar. They whisper. And the whisper echoes through history. Forever.